and welcome to the 495. I'm your host, Doug Sparks, editor-in-chief of Merrimack Valley Magazine. Lou, how are you doing today?
Doing very well today.
Yeah.
What was your temperature when you came in?
It was 98.5.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, 98.5, and it was the same temperature for the person before me, too.
Oh, really?
So we're setting the standard.
I know they've got the little log down there, too.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, I've gotten used to it. I've gotten used to getting my temperature checked. Not that I go out a lot, but it's, it's so strange at first, and then it becomes what you're used to.
I guess, yeah.
So I stopped by the Merrimack Valley Magazine offices today
Mm-hmm.
and picked up a copy of the latest issue. I got my copy in the mail yesterday, but I haven't even really had a time to open it and look at it that much.
Is your
But
piece
here
in
we
it
go.
about tasting milk coffee drinks?
No, that's an old piece. That's
an old piece.
I think when was I? So you read that online then?
Yes.
Okay. So why do you ask about that?
No, because it came up on my Facebook feed, and I said, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring it up because the original podcast I was doing for MVM wasn't for MVM. It was for the Bean magazine, this
Yep.
coffee magazine, and it was called No Milk, No Sugar because I drink everything
Yep.
black.
Right.
And that was the joke was they were going to send me out and force me to drink milk drinks. And I wrote about it, but it was neat because I was able to travel around the Merrimack Valley at a very quick pace, drinking lots and lots of coffee.
Oh, God.
And, downing cup after cup. So I went everywhere from, to Nashua to Manchester, New Hampshire.
In a typical day of that piece, how many cups of coffee did you have?
For that,
Yeah.
I probably had 12, I think.
Oh, my God.
But remember,
Really?
that's not a lot for me. Because I used to work in the coffee industry,
Yep.
and I'm sort of a caffeine addict.
Really?
So 12
So that's
cups,
not unusual?
12 cups of coffee wouldn't be extreme. Like when you work in the industry, you can easily do 24, 30 cups a day.
I'd be up till August.
Yeah, I know. It does.
Yeah.
It does affect your sleep, and people don't realize this. You can get caffeine through your skin. You can get it through your pores. So when you're roasting coffie, you have the additional caffeine that you're absorbing from the air.
Good
from
Lord.
the air itself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not that hardcore these days. Anyways, my guest today is Courtney Sale. She's the new artistic director of the Merrimack Repertory Theatre. Courtney, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hello.
So this must be the craziest time. You just started. You were telling me right before we started that you were maybe on the last plane out of Seattle in March to come out here to Lowell. What was that like? What was that like to travel in the plane knowing that the world was changing?
It was kind of hitting in Seattle a little early. Some of the first known cases were there. So we started, seeing things shudder. I was exiting out of a theater that I was the artistic director of there. I had my last day there was February 28th. So
yeah, and that was the Seattle Children's Theater.
Correct.
Okay.
And so in those 3 weeks, the world imploded, and MRT was quickly moving to an at-home scenario and postponing shows and communicating with artists. So it was a really wild time, and it's been extraordinary for all of us. I don't think I'm special, but it is a strange time to move across country and start a new job. I actually haven't been in the room with most of my staff and or my board since I've arrived.
Yeah. So you actually have lived in numerous places across the United States, right? You grew up in a place called Amherst, Virginia.
Correct.
That's a small town.
Very small, right in the middle of the state.
What was that like growing up in Amherst, Virginia?
Yeah. I grew up in a place I had no access to professional arts at all. I had a really great community of folks who, the algebra teacher became directed the play after school. So that really got me into theater.
So you were a drama club kid.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they didn't call it drama club. But
All right.
Yeah.
That's what we would have called it around here, drama club.
Yeah. And then, because it was very rural, I spent most of my school-free days in the woods. We were talking about this before, hiking a little bit.
Yeah.
I was notoriously barefoot all the time. My feet were like the sole of a shoe.
Yeah.
Just loved being outside, loved making stories.
That's great. And by the way, I this is totally off subject, but I have to talk about it because it kind of drives some people nuts. I'm a believer that kids should be barefoot, that it's actually good for them developmentally. And there's some books out there about this. But so my kids stay barefoot a lot. And it's funny because you occasionally draw the ire of passerby when we're out hiking and they're barefoot because they think we're sort of like abusing them, or they're going to step on I don't know, like a spiky root sticking up out of the ground.
Wait a second, you get Karen for that?
We do. So it's cool. I feel like we ought to commune over the barefoot thing because I think it's actually kind of important and people don't think about it. Did you do that naturally, or did you have parents who were kind of hippies?
No, my parents are not hippies at all. But they let me. The day would start, I would go outside. You can't really climb a tree well with the shoes I had. So I loved like climbing in my bare feet. My parents would always marvel. We had a gravel driveway and I could walk across it without wincing.
Yeah.
And it just it felt very organic to me. So that was kind of my scene.
Cool. Yeah, there's a book called Barefoot and Balanced. If anybody out there is a parent and they don't want to trust me, you shouldn't trust me. Don't trust anybody, right? If you want, it's someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Read Barefoot and Balanced. So that's great. So that was growing up in Amherst, and you were interested in nature and you're interested in theater. And where did life take you from there?
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to, keep pushing on this theater thing. And I had a job as a dishwasher. I've worked ever since I was 13. And I washed dishes and I saved up and I went to a program at Boston University when I was 15 years old. And back then I got a book and they're like, where are the theater camps? And I wrote to all the theater camps. And then I applied. And that summer was kind of life-changing for me because there were students from all over the country. It was my first time in a big city, and just the exposure to art and playwrights and theater. And I was like, oh, this is a viable profession. This is a viable career, viable path of study. So that opened up a huge threshold for me. And then I ended up going to undergrad in Seattle. Always had kind of an adventurous spirit, and I had a family member who lived out there, and I went to a small performing arts college called Cornish, great school, loved them, still very proud alumni, and was there for 4 years, and then started to ping pong around.
When was this around? What years?
97, late 90s into the early 2000s.
So this is sort of when the sort of famed height of the Seattle music scene is kind of dying off, right? Yeah.
So I caught the cusp end of the grunge piece. Okay. I was in a band called Thrust.
Okay.
And we played some. It was.
Did you know any of the? I feel like every time I meet someone from Seattle from that era, they were friends with sort of famous people. Did you know any of the big bands or? I was too late and too young, I think, to be in that scene, but it definitely, Chris Novoselic from Nirvana was always walking down the street, and so it was around, but it was kind of sunsetting when I was there. Sure. Right. So after and you eventually would return to Seattle, but before that, your path took you elsewhere.
Yeah. So I moved to New York and made work with a company called The Management, which is no longer there, but spent a lot of great years with some really wonderful artists, making work in a tiny little theater in the East Village. Okay. And then, I had the thing where I was like, I think I want to make theater in a theater where there's toilet paper in the bathroom. I think I'm ready to up the game.
Wait, so I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. Yeah. You were in New York when? What were the years about?
I was there 2002 till I went to graduate school in 2009.
So you came in just after 9/11.
I did. Yeah.
What was theater like in New York City right after that?
People were obviously still massively grieving and lots of recovery efforts happening. I think the community, you felt a deep need to connect with folks. So I felt really a great community in the off community. And folks who were there to shepherd in, the way we relaunch our lives out of this national tragedy. So it was a very powerful time to be there. Um, and but I also felt, I was there for a good while, and then I felt the limitations from having been a West Coast transplant and not having that master's credential, and really wanting to direct in a bigger canvas.
Mm-hmm.
And that led me to UT Austin,
Okay.
where I went to graduate school. And I moved to Austin at kind of a great time before Austin really blew up, and thought I would never leave Austin,
Yeah.
actually. Such a great town. Um, Audiences there very adventurous. There's so few brick and mortar theaters. People see performance in all kinds of ways. And I made a lot of work with a group called the Duplicates, and we made drive-in movie theater experiences. We made a lot of outdoor performance. The city is really your canvas there.
Yeah.
And people are so accustomed to going out. The weather's so great for most part of the year. So I thought I would be there for a bit. Freelanced out of Austin as a director, working in regional theaters all over the country.
Yeah. So I have a question about this.
Yeah.
Do you decide, at what point do you decide, because you're already directing, right? At what point do you decide, this is my path. I really like directing versus acting versus anything else you could be doing in the theater or writing?
Yeah. I think I knew that directing thing pretty early on in undergrad. I was already kind of thinking about the kind of like curb to curtain experience an audience has. So I wasn't, I think when you're an actor, you're getting very specific and like one slice. You get to like really kind of laser in, and I just kept kind of opening up the periphery, and so that came kind of early to me, and I was fortunate the undergrad program had, a little directing component. And as I started to do it, I was like, oh, I really like this. It's really challenging. It's really about understanding human motivation and what brings out the best in people. And then, producing my own work for many, many years, that also that helped fortify that piece.
Okay.
So I
Producing
think
your own work, meaning you were writing.
No, I've never been a writer. I love working with new plays and working with writers, but directing.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you're in Austin, and then you begin to think, even though you want to stay in Austin forever because it's so beautiful and it's so nice and it's so exciting, something starts to change.
Yeah. I met this incredible woman named Janet Allen, who runs the Indiana Repertory Theater. And I talked to Janet for about 35 seconds, and I was like, well, that's what I want to be when I grow up. So Janet has been at Indiana Rep for 25 years, and she spoke so meaningfully about making work in her community, being at the grocery store, running into people to talk about the plays, whether they loved them or they hated them. She's a Hoosier bred and born. She bikes to the theater every day. And I just like a person who really lives their values about their art form and what they want the theater to do. And so she hired me to direct a piece. And it actually was a piece for young audiences. It was a piece about Jackie Robinson. And I came to direct the piece. And I didn't know at the time, but I was in sort of an interview because she gave me all her favorites. She gave me her regular designers, her regular company of actors, to do a little splunking and a little vouching for me. And pretty shortly after that play opened, she offered me the associate artistic director role there, which was my first leadership role in a large regional theater. And I moved to Indianapolis, never thought I'd live in the Midwest, and had a tremendous time there for about 3 years.
Yeah. Indianapolis is the first place you've mentioned that I know almost nothing about. What's for people who hardcore MV people, what's Indianapolis like? What's the art scene like there?
Yeah. Oh God, it's such a lovely place. The community is so civic minded. So there is one theater There was one symphony. There was one art museum. So like, just in terms of like the pride and ownership of those places for an arts professional, it feels really welcoming and wonderful. It's also a very big sports town. So that's a true piece of it. But I felt like one of the things I loved about being there and working with that staff and board and audience is folks were in awe of arts. They felt like their institutions really engaged them.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful. Hard in the winter. It's a little hard in the winter.
Sure. Well, you came in March. I think we had a late winter. You got a hint of what you're in for, I'm sure.
Yeah.
If you like hiking and getting out and snowshoeing, but if you don't have snowshoes, get some snowshoes because it'll be good for your mood, I think. So your first play there was about the life of Jackie Robinson.
Yeah. So it was a piece by a dear colleague of mine, Stephen Dietz, and it's based on a book by Dan Guttman. So Dan Guttman wrote a bunch of stories around famous folks, and it's about a young white boy who he can travel through time with a baseball card, and he goes back to when Branch Rickey signs Jackie Robinson. But what happens for this white boy when he goes back in time is he is a Black boy. And so it's this incredible opportunity for young people to watch through the lens of systems of oppression, how he was dealing with it. And it was incredible because 11,000 Indiana middle school students saw this play. Mm-hmm. They all had wraparound support material, conversation, talk back. And it's one of the things that I so appreciate about Janet and the work that they do at the theater. They don't shy away from these hard topics for young people.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Let me keep on this subject for a second, because Courtney, did they do the play, or was the play done? In other words, I interviewed Dan Guttman. In fact, I read all of his books to my kid. And in fact, when he was 8 or 9 years old, I had him on the show with me to interview Dan, because the series of books was outstanding. And in fact, the Civil War book is actually a little bit rough for kids that age, but the history that was delved into it, and that book was particularly good. So did someone do a play of this Dan Guttman book, or did you guys decide to do the play?
So the person who adapted it is a wonderful man named Stephen Dietz, who's a playwright. And then this play is available. So it originally premiered at Seattle Children's Theater before my time there. And then Janet produced it at Indiana Rep with her team of artists and contracted the folks. And Stephen also, he has a very close relationship with Dan. He also did Hannes and Me.
Yep.
Yep. So
I'm surprised he didn't do the one about the Girls League. That was that would have been an interesting play as well.
Yeah, totally.
It's a very underrated series. It was a great series, and for reading to kids, it's just terrific.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, and you bring up the topic of politics, and you've been pretty vocal recently on social media, and have been willing to face some difficult political topics head on. Has that always been a part of your artistic vision? Are you drawn to difficult, thorny, complex political issues?
Yeah, I guess what I'll say is Janet opened up to me a way in which, theater is a safe space to examine a scary world. And she kind of opened that up to me in terms of the level of conversation that we can have in the theater that we probably can't have in a lot of other places. And particularly for young people.
Why is that? What is it about theater that lets that happen?
I think the fact that you have to silence yourself, you have to give your attention over. You're not blinded by your own opinion or voice. So you're there to actively listen. And that you're doing it in community. Like you're in response to all the people around you. It matters how you behave. It matters in terms of the energy and in which you're with folks. So I will say, Janet kind of opened that that trajectory for me. And I really felt like, looking at the American theater, looking at it as a predominantly white institution, growing up where I did, I feel very fortunate in terms of, 40% of my elementary school was Black students. And so I had this like entry to the world that I didn't question very much. And then I started to really see that as a value as I went into the theater, because it is so much from a white lens. When I went to SCT, that's really when it crystallized for me, when I went to Seattle Children's Theater. Because the first thing I did, sorry.
When did you go to Seattle?
I started in Seattle August 2016.
Okay.
And one of the first things I did with a small group of staff was just run data about who were the artists on stage, who were the directors, who were the design teams. And, the numbers before us, we couldn't argue with the numbers before us. It was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was overwhelmingly predominantly white artists in this institution. And then I looked at our patron base, which is predominantly Seattle Public Schools, which is such a richly diverse group of students, speaks 20 languages, and said, we have a real disconnect happening, and we have got to course correct. We've got work to do. We've got inclusion work to do. We've got equity work to do. And so that was a big part of my tenure there. And I feel very fortunate that Seattle, I think, is really, I wouldn't say leading, but like excited and engaged in the equity and anti-racism conversations. So we also got a lot of funding for that really helped us overhaul the institution.
Yeah. So, we talked about the pandemic. You're coming out here in as the pandemic starts, but in 2020, it's also been a really divisive, heated year politically in the United States, and you're now looking to create some sort of vision for the MRT as this is going on. How does that shape what you're thinking about in terms of the plays you're going to do and the sort of work you're going to produce?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that drew me to MRT first is that in two areas, in terms of new work and making work for the community we serve, that was evident, that was primed. I felt it from top down board leadership, from the staff, a real hunger and need. And the theater had started to make some really important strides in the most recent years. To my mind, I'm in a vessel role. I'm in a role that is about how do I expand this platform, because I truly believe that the American theater is for everyone. And when I look at where we're situated in Lowell and who we're serving or who hasn't felt included, I think part of that vessel, is bringing folks in to help build those bridges. Right now we have really there's been a clarion call in this nation that we have to lean into anti-racism. We have to speak out when we feel anti-Blackness present. And in terms of programming, I mean, that's also about like supporting those stories, supporting those artists, and making sure that we've given opportunity for folks who maybe are early in their equity journeys or early in their anti-racist journeys to have some on-ramps, So I think the theater has an opportunity to elucidate and educate and also celebrate, because I think this work can be super joyful. And like we have a long road ahead of us.
Yeah. In practical terms, what are the plans? When are we going to start seeing plays? Do you know?
Yes. So we're We're in a moment where currently we're set to program in October. Because we are a professional theater, we work with multiple unions. And so we're getting some information from our union partners about guidelines and keeping in touch with all of our peers across the country because these plans are constantly shifting. So we're still doing some scenario planning. We're very hopeful for the fall. But I will also say there are months ahead and there are many factors.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about the Young Company and the status of the Young Company, and maybe can you describe to us what that is for people who don't know what the Young Company is?
Yeah. So every summer, MRT opens its doors to high school students that participate in a 3-week training program, theater-specific training program. The incredible program director, Robert Cornelius, is a Chicago-based artist who's been teaching for many, many years. It's focused on collaboration. Students write their own work, they perform their own work, and it's really building 21st century skills, critical thinking. So this year, we knew pretty early that we were going to have to shift some things. We're actually going virtual with the program this year. Many, many, many of our students are scholarshiped. We're also supporting them in terms of technology needs if they need laptop and Wi-Fi, etc. So we will start on July 13th with our virtual cohort. And we actually have a multi-city cohort this year. So we have a lot of students from the region, but we also have a group from Chicago joining us because of Robert's presence there. And so they will work for 3 weeks. And Robert has overhauled the curriculum so that they can do it on Zoom and work from home.
How does that work? How does that work to do these? I guess it's just hard for me to imagine.
Yeah. So they start in the morning. They gather each morning, and there's a warm-up piece that they have each morning. So we've asked the students, you need to be able to make sure you got room to move, etc. And then we have breakout sessions where they're writing and devising work. And then they're at the end of the day, they're presenting what they built. And so there's many different assignments that they have. I think the first day is like they're building tiny plays in their home environment. And so they have to pull different objects. Yeah.
It's funny. I know there's almost no alternative, but sometimes I think one of the benefits of theater is that it's an alternative to virtual reality and the sort of bottleneck of the big social media platforms. But in the midst of this crisis, this is all we have in a lot of ways, right? You can't stage plays. You can't go out to a park, I assume. So you're forced now to use these things that prior to 2020 you were the alternative to. Do you think a lot about that?
Yeah, I mean,
And I wanted to mention, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to mention MRT's YouTube channel, which is great. And I've been watching your interviews. So if people want to check them out, go over to YouTube and go to the MRT channel and look at some of Courtney's interviews there with some actors and playwrights and some really, really great stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of theaters have taken different approaches on this. In terms of, folks have been broadcasting their work, and we are a medium-sized theater that was never kind of built as a media company. Some of these bigger houses had always filmed with multiple cameras and done really high quality recordings of their shows. And we figured out pretty early that that wasn't the right thing for us. We record for archive purposes, but it wasn't the same experience as being in the live event. And so the thing that we, because we're focused on new plays and playwrights, we said, how can we use this form to talk about process and demystify, what is the journey of how a new play comes to be? Because it's not fast. It's slow, committed work. And we have these incredible artists that we're working with whose voices are singular, who have an incredible lens on what's happening in the world. and let's use that format for this, because that actually can be very successful. So we made a conscious choice that our Zoom content, our video content is solely focused on process. And we're going to do a little more of that as we were able to commission 2 playwrights. And one of the playwrights we've commissioned, a wonderful writer, is Cambodian, Vichet Chum, is, we're hopeful that we'll do a little excerpt of some readings later in the fall to give people more access to this and how a play is made. But yeah, it's been different, it's been different for each theater. And I think it was important for us to recognize our size, and whatever we execute, we want to do it really well.
Yeah. So with the little time I have left, I wanted to ask you about something before I turn over the questions to Lou, because he's going to have a few things to ask you. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about Lowell, because you've lived in Austin, New York City, Indianapolis, Amherst, Virginia. You've lived all over, and I know you're getting Lowell through the lens of the pandemic, but I'm wondering what you see and what your experience of this region is. What's different about it? What have you noticed? What do you find interesting or compelling?
Yeah. So I was very fortunate, just a couple, I guess it was about 10 days ago, a board member and I in masks did a 90-minute walking tour. And it was so what I needed. And I hadn't done any of the river walk piece yet. And it just kind of opened up for me, because as I mentioned, I love to be connected with nature in any form. What I see here is I see a town that is resourceful. I see a town that is scrappy, and I'm not using that word pejoratively. I think people want to get things done. And oftentimes it's it takes smaller groups to get things done. So the size of Lowell is very compelling to me. I think it's a place where people really care about history. But equally, they also care about the influx of new people coming in and how that history brushes up against different perspectives, whether it's an immigrant perspective. So I see incredible potential here, in this small urban environment. I said this to someone the other day, and they were like, "I don't believe you." I have a little dog in my life named Luna, and I love the way I interact with people on the street. They're always like, beautiful dog," and it's just the clarity in communication and the kindness in the communication has been I don't know if that's COVID. I don't know if that's people in their house, but I am feeling an overwhelming sense of kindness and an overwhelming sense of welcome.
Yeah, I don't know if it's COVID either, because I feel that things have changed a little bit too. I get out and I walk a lot more than I have in the past with my kids. I have a little dog too, a little 3-pound Chihuahua, and for sure I've made friends and had conversations with my neighbors, and I would have never known their names in the past. I would have never exchanged a word with them in the past. And every night I see them, and they come over and they say hi, and it's kind of. And I saw this in 9/11. I was in New York after 9/11 too, and I felt there was some sort of change there, because it went from the sort of place where people were, if you ordered your coffee wrong, someone was willing to stab you, to a place where people seemed a lot more gentle and a lot more kind of open, and we kind of needed each other in a different way. Which is not to say there weren't kind people in the Merrimack Valley, but I think that might be a positive outcome of the pandemic, is that we're kind of getting outside and talking to, and getting away from the computers a little bit, and talking to some of our neighbors face to face. Yeah. So, who knows?
Who knows?
But that's cool. Lou, do you have questions for Courtney?
Yeah, you started down the road I wanted to go, because I felt really compelled to take advantage, Courtney, of your perspective on American culture through your travels. And we here in Massachusetts, in particular, in northern New England, we understand we have our own culture, and we know it's for better or for worse at times. With your perspective here in New England, and we can expand it beyond Lowell, just here in New England and our culture, is it more often, in your view, for the better or for the worse? Our own particular culture here in New England.
Oh gosh. I think, back on the culture of clarity and the culture of like, being unafraid to interact.
Right.
Those things are like, those make my heart sing. And also like very different from like growing up in the middle of Virginia where like you don't want to impose and it's polite, and Seattle has like its own like Seattle freeze and passive aggressiveness. I think the thing that's been a little.
What was that term? I missed it. Seattle freeze?
Freeze.
What is that?
Seattle folks make plans and then they cancel like an hour before. And they always are like, they're Norwegian and they want to keep you like at a distance. Like everybody wants to just be at home in their sweats. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like I belong in Seattle.
Yeah. I think back on I think one thing that's been a particular challenge back on, the work towards equity and anti-racism is, like I've had some tough conversations with some subscribers, some who've chosen to not re-up at at MRT based on, the way we're headed. And I feel like there can be a sense of like the liberalism is like, we're done. Like we've already done that, like a post-racial quality to
right.
it. And that's been very rare cases, but that's the place where I think, no, like let's dig in a little more, stay in the discomfort. That's a place where I'm like, maybe for worse in pockets. Yeah.
Did you have, I mean, obviously you were born in New England and you probably have some affection for here. I'm sure you do. And you're back here in New England, obviously. So, but other regions, I know you liked Austin very much. I've got family in Austin, so I've been down there myself as well. It's a beautiful town. What part of the country did you find most engaging other than here home in New England?
Yeah, well, so just to clarify, my town is Amherst, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
So I grew up in the South. I guess the thing that why I thought I was going to be in Austin for the rest of my life is, going back to something we were talking about earlier, that folks love to gather, and it's not, and like stopping by, and sitting on a porch with someone, like that's not interruptive or imposing. Like you don't have to plan it.
Yeah.
I had someone call me the other day and I was like, oh my God, am I late for a meeting? And she's like, no, I'm just calling you. So I think like that, like I like to bring that with me wherever I go. I did a ton of like play readings in Austin in my living room and just to invite new folks in and get to know people. I can't wait to do that here.
And I think people separate Austin from Texas. They think Austin is an island in Texas, but what I find is Austin is kind of a caricature of Texas. It's a little bit more amplified, a little bit more exaggerative in certain aspects, but Austin isn't too far from the rest of Texas. I mean, you can get out in various areas and see an entirely different culture, but Austin is pretty much Texas, but just with a little bit of flair.
Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah, sometimes Texas is like right in your face in Austin.
Yeah. I want to talk about the role as a director and what you think the role of the director is in live theater, especially in relation to the writer. What are your obligations to the writer? What are your obligations to yourself? How do you skirt that difference?
Yeah, great question. So I define the director as the primary driver of culture in a room. And that doesn't mean that you're like 10 steps ahead of everyone. Typically, like I like to think about it like I'm maybe 30 seconds or a minute ahead. I'm the person who's going to keep us moving forward. Because I work on new plays and because I think playwrights are the bravest lot of the theater tribe, to my mind, I am trying to bolster and buoy their vision as much as humanly possible. So I'm never commenting on what isn't there. I'm commenting on what is there, and trying to embolden them to the version of the play that it wants to be.
Do you ever question your judgment in that regard? In other words, do you ever look at a character or look at a line or look at a scene and saying, I'm not really sure quite what I'm supposed to be delivering here?
Yeah. I think And I will definitely with the playwrights, folks that I've worked with, I'll say, like, I don't know that we've earned this yet. If you really want to say this, or you really want this relationship to happen in the play, like, I don't know that the preceding stuff has earned it. That's one way, like, I talk about it. So, I think you're always kind of sharpening against each other.
So you do have contact back and forth and talk with the playwright.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I love for them, like, to be in the room as long as they can. I've done a lot of work of developing plays and then getting them to production with writers. So, yeah, having that long arc time with them is really important to me.
So, do you know what the first play is going to be when you reopen, and can you tell us what it is?
Yeah. So currently, in the October plan, we are opening with a new play called The Lowell Offering.
I know about the Lowell Offering.
Yes. So this was commissioned. Sean Daniels, my predecessor, commissioned the play, and was in rehearsal, almost going to tech, when we had to push pause. So that's slated for first.
Yeah, and this is about, and it's been a while, but I think it was sort of like a literary magazine put out by mill workers. Is that right? The Lowell Offering?
That's correct. Yep, it's a relationship between two mill girls is kind of the primary relationship of the play. So it's this really wonderful love letter to Lowell.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us. I hope you'll come back on once things are kind of cooking, and we'll talk about what's going on in the later half of 2020 and 2021. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you all. Love to. My pleasure.
So next week on the show, we're going to be interviewing John Cagg, who's a philosopher. It's going to be the first time we've had a philosopher on the show.
Oh, and that sounds like fun.
Yeah. If you think, oh boy, he's a very, very interesting guy. He's written 3 books, 2 on William James, 1 on hiking with Friedrich Nietzsche. I reviewed his latest book on William James in the latest issue of Merrimack Valley Magazine. This might not be the sort of person you would think of when you think of philosophers. So I hope you tune in next week when we talk to John. Courtney, once again, if you're still out there, thank you very much. Lou, thank you very much. See everybody next week.